I want to begin with a quote from Jericho Brown's Deliverance. When Black vocabulary heralds homemade belief, for any kind of havoc, there is deliverance. I think that's a terrific place to start, as it can be argued that that belief in renewal, in hope itself, is a key idea in Black literature. You all can consider this sermon a sequel to the one I preached last month on decolonizing the final frontier, looking at Black science fiction. When I spoke on Black science fiction, I blasted you all with authors and plots and resources like crazy, because for Black science fiction, that information is harder to find. But Black poetry is well established, and finding Black poets and Black poems is pretty easy these days, thanks to the work of one particular organization, and I'll come to them in a minute. What I listed last time as things I loved about Black science fiction, I think I'm going to sharpen this time into lessons white readers can learn from Black literature. And let me spin that down into some things that are specific to Black poetry. We can learn through Black poetry to trust Black leadership. After Obama, it seems like that would be a simple thing, and yet it seldom seems to shake out that way. By reading Black poetry, we can learn to value Black agency. That's the ability to take action over Black pain, which often looks a lot like the ability to suffer. In science fiction, there's definitely more agency, less pain. In poetry, you're going to see both and. But poetry is a transformative space, and what begins as pain at the top of a poem can become a lot of other things. As Jericho Brown reminds us, for any kind of havoc, there is deliverance. Black poetry, like Black science fiction and other forms of Black literature, centers Black lives and Black perspectives. In poetry, we don't always get a story, a narrative, but we definitely get a point of view. So regarding Black leadership, I'm going to talk about an organization called Cave Canem. Bear with me a minute. Going to see if I can share content. This is one of those things I think we probably should have clarified before the service started, but I'm going to give it a go and we'll see what happens. Ah, wonderful. Okay, the logo you're seeing is the logo for Cave Canem, the Black Poets Workshop. Cave Canem, a home for Black poetry. Cave Canem was founded in 1996 by poets Toy Darracott and Cornelius Eady. It's a big deal that next year will be their 25th anniversary. They can be found online at cavecanempoets.org. The name Cave Canem, which is Latin for beware of dog, comes from the desire to create a protected space for Black poets. And the core of Cave Canem is a week-long retreat held every summer right now at the University of Pittsburgh in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, although it's been held a number of other places, including on the grounds of a monastery. There's an application process. It requires that poets be over the age of 21 and of African American ancestry to apply. And then every year, around 50 poets are chosen to attend this week-long workshop. And those poets generally return 2 or 3 times in order to create continuity and better the networking available. Some of those poets who come as fellows return later as faculty for the workshops. Cave Canem collaborates with over 20 local, regional, and national partners to create readings, craft conversations, and workshops spanning multiple universities and cultural organizations, including the New School in New York. If you're interested in hearing more of the Cave Canem poets read, or if you're interested in those craft conversations, Cave Canem has an extremely active YouTube channel, and there are hundreds of hours of those craft conversations and those readings, particularly the ones from the New School, available online. In the words of one Cave Canem fellow, Cave Canem reinforces my commitment to making urgent, honest, and unforgiving poems. Cave Canem's community workshops have served more than 900 poets of color since 1999. So those aren't people who were served by the week-long workshop in Pennsylvania. These are people that have been able to attend localized workshops started by the folks that came to the summer programs. This model of teaching and gathering and networking and then going out and spreading the knowledge, spreading the love and support has proven so successful that Cave Canem has worked with Latino and Korean American poets to launch similar efforts in those literary communities. On top of all of this, Cave Canem supports multiple prizes and publications. Every year, the Cave Canem prize-winning book of poetry is published by a different prestigious university press. It circulates among several. And every year, Northwestern University Press publishes the Cave Canem Northwestern UP Poetry Prize. There's also an annual chapbook prize. A chapbook is a half-length collection of poems. It's a good way for a lot of people to get started. And so annually, a chapbook is published by, a Cave Canem chapbook is published by Highlight Books and presented at the O Miami Poetry Festival. In addition to all this, Cave Canem publishes annual anthologies from its central and its localized workshops, and I'm going to talk in just a few moments about some larger Cave Canem anthology projects. So in knowing more about Black poetry and reading Black poems and in supporting Cave Canem, we're getting to see this flourishing of Black leadership in the arts. Cave Canem, like other nonprofits right now, is taking a hit with the pandemic. They are doing workshops online this year instead of in person, but they could certainly use donations. So if you want to go to cavecanempoets.org and make a donation, I know the good folks out there would really appreciate it. And I know, especially leading up into the 25th year, they have a number of projects in the works that may or may not happen now because of COVID. So here's hoping. Moving on into the ways in which reading Black poetry can help us value Black agency and center Black lives and perspectives, rather than offering you an avalanche of resources, I'm going to focus on 5 books. The first one, after what I've just said about the good work at Cave Canem, should come as no surprise. Again, I'm going to see if I can share some content with you. The first book I'm going to talk about is Gathering Ground. So this is the first of the big Cave Canem anthologies. They do shorter little annual ones, but Gathering Ground was published 15 years ago, or 14 years ago, in honor of Cave Canem's 10-year anniversary. And it contains poems from folks like Lucille Clifton, from Elizabeth Alexander, who gave the inaugural poem when Clinton was inaugurated, from Tracy K. Smith, who is one of our recent poet laureates, from Jericho Brown, whom I quoted at the top of this, who I will talk more about this in a minute, but whose book has just won the 2020 Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. So Gathering Ground is a fantastic anthology, and I highly recommend using it as a sampler to get to know some Black poets who are publishing right now and doing great things. There are over 100 folks included in the Cave Canem Gathering Ground anthology. The next book I want to discuss is another anthology. I'm going to give you a look at that too. There we go. This is Black Nature, 4 Centuries of African American Nature Poetry, edited by Camille Dungy, who was the assistant editor on the Gathering Ground anthology. This is one of those phenomenal books that is a reader, an anthology, a textbook, kind of all in one. And not only did Dungy have to work on gathering poems from contemporary poets for this book, but she dug in and dug back to find 400 years worth of poems by Black poets. It goes way, way back. She did a tremendous job with the research and the permissions for this. And the book, which you can't see from the picture, maybe I can give you here. This is a big book. This is not only 400 years worth of African American nature poetry, Black nature poetry, but it's nearly 400 pages worth. One of the things Dungy says in her introduction, and I'll read you her words in just a moment, but I want to give you the context here, that we tend to think about nature poetry as, oh, people admiring the trees, people admiring the landscape. But as Dungy will point out, Black nature challenges the notion of what nature poems are, that it goes beyond just admiring the landscape, but it questions, sometimes even interrogates. Dungy says, the pastoral as diversion, as a construction of a culture that dreams through landscape and animal life of a certain luxury and innocence, is less prevalent. Rather, in a great deal of African American poetry, we see poems written from the perspective of the workers of the field. Though these poems defy pastoral conventions in Western poetry, are they not pastorals? And I think that's a question that really animates this collection. To give you a sense of what I mean, I'm going to give you a few samples. The first one I'm going to describe rather than read because it's so short that I don't want to step on copyright toes by reading it out to you. But let me say that included in here is a poem by the fantastic poet Evie Shockley, and the poem is a personals ad written by a visual rural winter image seeking a frostbitten river. And it's tremendous fun. Beyond the cheeky personal ad, we have poems that, as Dungy said, conform maybe more closely to our notions of the pastoral, and yet contain a perspective we maybe haven't seen previously. I'm going to give you a few lines from Kendra Hamilton's Southern Living. To love a garden is to be in love with possibility, for it can never, almost by definition, ever be complete. To love a garden is to be in love with contradiction, ravished by order, yet ever open to the wild. There are also a couple different poems here on cockroaches. After all, urban wildlife is a factor of many of our lives and is well chronicled here. I'm going to close this little mini review of Black nature, though, with some words about another bug familiar to many of us, if not all of us, here in Iowa at this time of year. These are some words from Tim Siebel's Ambition 2, Mosquito in the Mist. He's speaking as the mosquito. You human types, you two-legged sapiens, you guys are walking smoothies to me, milkshakes wearing trousers, a cup of coffee mowing a lawn. But I sense some chronic unfriendliness, some ongoing agitation from you hemoglobes. My family and me are small things trying to quench a thirst. It's our nature. The random violence is really uncalled for. The bashing, the swatting, and the cursing. So those are two anthologies I highly recommend. They're tremendous fun, tremendous ways to grow your perspective on the world, to come to appreciate the richness of contemporary Black literature. I'm going to move now to talking about 3 individual collections. The first is Confessions of a Barefaced Woman by Allison Joseph. Allison is an expert on poetic form. She can do all kinds of things with sonnets, sestinas, villanelles, forms that cause most poets to tear out their hair. Allison slides right through them. But she's not pretentious in her use of form. She's also comfortable inventing forms and incorporating other forms like jump rope rhymes and other people's invented forms, like a form that emerged out of a Cave Canem workshop, Affa Michael Weaver's The Bop as form. To give you a sense of Allison's work, let me share some of her titles, and then I'll give you a few sample lines. So, titles out of Confessions of a Barefaced Woman. Advice on Being a Pesky Little Sister. After shaving my head, I begin to think beauty is overrated. And Venus de Milo takes a sexual enlightenment class for women. It's a sample line from the beginning of Allison Joseph's poem, Role Models. The next time a man demands to know who my literary foremothers are, I want to see his jaw drop when I say, straight-faced, Wonder Woman, the Bionic Woman, and Supergirl. From Daughter, Mother, Sister, Wife. When your mother is a poet, you may get crumpets, not pizza, gravy, but no potatoes. You may not get fed at all. And lastly, from one of the final poems of the book, Misery, a Guide. First, allow resentments to build for as long as possible, decades if you can manage it. Blame everyone else for your troubles. So, a terrific book for stepping into poetry, particularly for stepping in and getting comfortable with some poetic forms. The next individual collection I'm going to talk about is Jericho Brown's The Tradition. This is the book that just won the 2020 Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. Now, among poets, when we've really enjoyed a collection, particularly when we've really enjoyed a difficult, or what we would call a more oblique collection, we all tend to sound like we're at a wine tasting or a formal dinner. And we say things like, it's really dense and chewy. It has some bite and some grit, but it's ethereal. If you read the reviews of the tradition, you'll see some of those words crop up. If you're not familiar with contemporary poetry, reading the poems of the tradition may seem frustrating at first, but stay with them. Brown has a lot to say, and he's well worth reading. He's getting into a lot of really interesting stuff. These are some sample lines from the poem After Avery R. Young. All land owned is land once stolen. So the blues people of the world walk on water. We will not die. Black music, black rage, black city of the soul in a very cold town. Black ice is ice you can't see. And from bullet points. I promise, if you hear of me dead anywhere near a cop, then that cop killed me. He took me from us and left my body, which is, no matter what we've been taught, greater than the settlement a city can pay a mother to stop crying, and more beautiful than the new bullet fished from the folds of my brain. And the final collection that I want to give you a quick review of is Ross Gay's Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude. These are poems of prayer, poems of praise, rich, complicated. Some of them are outright daffy. They are all soulful, and almost all of them. I'm going to pull down that so I can pretend I'm looking out at all of you. Almost all of them happen in a garden. I know we have a large gardening population here at the CVUU, and I think there are very many of you who would enjoy Ross Gay's work from that connection alone. But let me give you a few of his titles, and then I'm going to give you some sample lines. Ode to buttoning and unbuttoning my shirt. Ode to sleeping in my clothes. And then some wonderfully short titles. Armpit. Spoon. And come on. In terms of sample lines, this is from To the Fig Tree on 9th and Christian, which was reprinted in one of the annual Best American Poetry anthologies. Gay says, soon there were 8 or 9 people gathered beneath the tree, looking into it like a constellation, pointing. Do you see it? A man on his way to work hops twice to reach at last his fig, which he smiles at and calls baby. Come here, baby, he says, and blows a kiss to the tree. I'm going to give you some sample lines from Burial, which is a poem about the planting of a father's ashes in the roots of 2 young plum trees. This year, he was giddy at the first real fruit set and nestled into the 30 or 40 plums in the 2 trees, peering out from the sweet meat with his hands pressed against the purple skin like cathedral glass. My father guffawed by kicking from the first bite buckets of juice down my chin. So with that image, of a father's joy from beyond the grave, I'm going to release us into the rest of the service. And thank you for listening. I will be happy to answer more questions, make more book recommendations on celebrating Black poetry during our breakout room after the service.